Hi everyone, welcome to the February 4th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and this week we're taking a look at Saturday's card at Aqueduct, focusing on their late pick 5 sequence there, which does include their Derby prep, the Grade 3 Withers, going as race 8 on a 9-race card. This one's for the 3-year-olds, going a mile and an eighth on the main track, so a real test of stamina for them, but it's not an easy sequence outside of the Withers. That's an 11-horse field with looks pretty wide open, but the 4 other races in this pick 5 sequence don't make it easy because you've got a lot of vulnerable favorites, a lot of contenders to consider, some maiden claiming races, different types of races to handicap, and Craig and I are going to go through all of it on this podcast. So Craig, I think we've got a lot to dive into in this Aqueduct sequence.
Yeah, we do. I'll be honest up front. I don't know if this is a pick 5 I will actually play myself because all the races to me look so contentious. I don't think I want to spend several $100s putting a ticket in together that I think could win. But I do think all the races are interesting for a lot of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll dive into. And hopefully the weather stays good and we get this card in. It looks fairly promising, I would say. And yeah, it's always good to see the 3-year-olds too as well in the Withers.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with the weather. As we're recording this on Friday morning, I'm in Queens right now, so pretty close, not that far from Aqueduct, and the temperatures are in the high 40s, but I know later today they're supposed to plummet, and you're getting a lot of rain in the area. I think the forecast today calls for rain turning to ice, so that's never a good sign for racetracks. We'll see what they do with the Saturday card at Aqueduct, but I would imagine it's going to go forward. There's no snow predicted, and the temperatures are not supposed to get lower than the high 20s, so you would think that's going to be good enough for them to run, but they'll have to see how the track handles that changing temperature pattern into tomorrow. But aside from all that, we're not going to make predictions about the weather. We will make some predictions about the races on Saturday. So let's dive into race 5, the beginning of this late pick 5 sequence on Saturday. Craig, this one is a $10,000 claimer going the 1-turn mile. We've got a pretty competitive field of 10 runners signed on, and the difficult thing about these low-level claiming races at Aqueduct is you do have horses coming from different class levels, different races, and I think one of the difficulties with these types of races at the lower claiming levels is you have to kind of assess who's coming out of the stronger races, who's coming out of those bottom-level races, and which ones are in decent form right now.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I rely on. We don't talk about a lot of claiming races on our shows, certainly not on the Tuesday Pacecast, and pretty rarely do we get any like this in our forecast on a Friday, but these are every bit as interesting to me as the upper level races, sometimes even more so. And that for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, you just get horses coming from all different kind of races. And for me, this one was really tough. It is a race with a big field of 10. The pace projector doesn't see a lot of speed in here, which I would tend to agree with. Says it's going to favor horses on or near the early lead. But frankly, I don't particularly care for the 2 horses that are shown up front. Not a big fan, but I did take that into account that I don't think there's going to be a lot of pace. The one horse that really has the kind of form that I like and that I was leaning to in a race like this is the 8-horse Potantico. He's a horse who had a vet claim voided a couple starts back. He had run a really bad race the time before that when he was first off the claim for trainer Tom Morley. And it looks like after that voided claim, he was given some time off. He was off about 5 months. He came back and ran a pretty good race, ran a 94 TimeformUS speed figure. He was way behind Blew It and Twisted Tom, who's in this field. But then I like that he stepped up again last time despite a wide trip on a track that I would say was definitely a bit speed favoring. Certainly wasn't something that he was going to relish. And I just think he has some dirtied up form in here compared to some others. He's been running at this bottom level, but I think he has some upside as he's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the horses I was considering in here, and I do think he's going to be every bit of that 6-1 that I pegged him on the morning line, even though he's going out for the dangerous Tom Morley barn. They named an apprentice, the 10-pound bug rider, Derby Glass, who we haven't seen a whole lot of, giving her a shot here, so I think that might scare some people off him a little bit. So I think he's definitely one to consider in this race, and one that was on my short list of contenders. The horse that I do think you have to make a decision about here is the number 1 Runabout, who I pegged as the morning line favorite at 3-1. I could see him going off even lower than that. I mean, he is a horse that going 3, 4, 5 races back has a set of speed figures that do make him clearly the horse to beat. I think the question with Runabout is the current form that he's in, because we didn't see him for the entire second half of 2021, and he came back in that same race as Potantico last time on January 1st when Battalion beat them all pretty decisively, and I thought the horse that I wanted most out of that race from a trip standpoint was Runabout, because he did get squeezed back pretty significantly at the start. That put him much farther back in the pack than I think he typically wants to be. And from there, he did ride the rail for some of the race, but I thought Eric Cancel kind of overcommitted to the inside. He tried to squeeze through inside of a tiring Flowers for Lisa, an upper stretch, and it just seemed like Runabout never wanted to go through that hole. So I thought that was a useful return to the races. I think going 1.125 miles off the layoff, off a 6-month layoff, is a tough thing to do. So turning back to the 1-turn mile could work in Runabout's favor. He's never been the most reliable win candidate. He's got a string of defeats going back to, I believe, the end of 2020. He typically does settle for minor awards, but I do think just from a class and form standpoint, he's one that's kind of hard for me to get around here, though there are others that I would want to use at better prices. Craig, what do you make of a horse like the number 5, Twisted Tom, who is another one that I think could take some money here? He is just such a deep closer, and I agree with you that I'm not in love with the likely pace setters here, horses like the number 9, Flowers for Lisa, who was riding that speed bias on New Year's Day last time at Aqueduct, and or I should say 2 back for him, and then came back and ran very poorly in his subsequent start, and also the number 6, High Command, who might be an interesting price player, but obviously would need to step up and run a better race than he has recently to win here. So Twisted Tom, he definitely has the back class to be pretty dangerous, but it's tough to take a deep closer like him going the 1-turn mile in a race with so little speed signed on.
Yeah, that was part of why I landed on Potantico, because he's able to stay closer to the pace. It's hard to believe Twisted Tom's still around. There was a time he was running speed figures that put him with the top 3-year-olds when he basically swept that New York bred 3-year-old series that they run in the summer. But he's an 8-year-old now. Those days were a long, long time ago, obviously, and he's just dropping back to the bottom. He's been there before, and without pace, I just have a hard time. He was one I actually just tossed pretty much right away. I agree with you about Runabout. He's clearly the horse to beat, but in a race like this, I'm usually going to look for a bit of a price. That's why I went with Potantico, but yeah, nothing really would surprise me in a field like this.
Yeah, there are 2 other horses that I want to touch upon, one who I have a positive take on and one who I have a negative take on. The one that I'm against is the number 10, Playwright, and I think I pegged him as the 3rd choice on the morning line. If you're kind of just going through this race and looking for the horse that's in good form right now, I feel like maybe some people might land on Playwright as that horse, and I would try to talk you off that opinion, because he's coming out of those $8,000 claiming races at Aqueduct, and it's worth noting the $8,000 level is the bottom level at Aqueduct at this time of year. So those races tend to come up, I think, considerably weaker than the $10,000 races that are just one step up, and this is a $10,000 race, and I think the fact that Playwright's moving back up in class is a significant jump for him. And furthermore, Playwright got the job done last time, but that was a race that just fell into his lap. He's not a horse that likes to win races, and it was as if he was even trying to lose last time. Horses were ranging up on his outside. There was a tiring front runner that he seemed reluctant to get by in the late stages. He just barely got up as they came to the wire. You could look up the PPs of the horses that finished around him. They're not stellar. The 3rd place finisher was coming out of some $5,000 claiming races in the Mid-Atlantic region, so that was not as strong a race as it might seem, even though Playwright did win it. The horse at a price that I think might be able to get into the mix and could fly under the radar here is the number 4, O'Shea Can You See. The thing I don't like is that he's yet another horse with a closing style, and that might not work to the way this race figures to play out from a pace standpoint, but I do think that O'Shea Can You See is getting meaningful class relief here. He's been competing in some tougher $16,000 and $20,000 claiming races that are just tougher than the $10,000 level that he's going to be competing at here. And he last ran on January 2nd, another one of those days that featured a pretty strong speed bias and even a bit of a rail bias at Aqueduct. And O'Shea, can you see, was not on the inside. He was towards the back of the pack most of the way. That was a race that was wired on the front end by a horse that rode the rail. And also, I think that was just a better field. And he's been facing better fields in all of his recent races. The last time that he ran at this $10,000 level back on May 29th of last year, he was a winner at 13-1, and I think a repeat of that kind of effort puts him in the mix here. So he's the kind of horse that I think is going to go off at double-digit odds that I would definitely want to include in the first leg of this pick 5 sequence.
Yeah, I've got nothing, no argument with either one of your opinions on those horses. I think we're going to see a lot of horses coming up in the near future, like O'Shea, can you see, who just were against the track. So I think you can put a line through his race, definitely dropping in class, and totally agree with you about play rate. I mean, the bottom is the bottom. Sometimes the number doesn't mean much. They call it 8,000, could easily be 5,000. So usually the jump from the very bottom, even one level up, is pretty significant. And I didn't like him a bit in here.
Let's move on to the 6th race, and we're going to stay in the claiming ranks. This one is a $25,000 non-winners of 2 lifetime claimer going 6.5 furlongs on the main track. And I think, Craig, one of the appealing reasons to play this sequence is that there are some favorites scattered throughout that I think are beatable, and one of them is in this race with the number 4 Prisoner, a horse that you have to make a decision about because he kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in this race. Ran a big speed figure when he was a 2-year-old, but that was a pretty long time ago. He's now a newly turned 4-year-old. He's returning as a gelding, switching from Todd Pletcher to Rudy Rodriguez, dropping in for a claiming tag, first start back. There are a lot of red flags with this horse.
Yeah, I mean, these horses will beat you every once in a while, but he's simply not the type of horse I'm ever going to bet. I wouldn't know what to do with him in a pick 5. I would probably leave him out, to be honest. The speed figure, yeah, he ran a 107, which towers over the field. But to me, it's completely meaningless. It's hard to imagine this is remotely the same horse, because if it was, he wouldn't be in a 25,000 non-winners of 2 lifetime race, in my opinion. So don't know the story with him, but he's the kind of horse I'm always going to avoid.
Yeah, I don't know the full story either. Obviously, they've had some trouble getting this horse back to the races. I did watch a recent workout, or not so recent, but a workout from last year on XBTV when it seemed like he was still with Todd Pletcher at Palm Beach Downs as recently as last November. Actually, I believe that was November of 2021. I suppose it could have been November of 2020. It's hard to keep track of where this horse has been so long, but he was with Todd Pletcher for a while after that. He now is in Rudy Rodriguez's barn. For what it's worth, I was looking up some stats for Rudy and Formulator, and first time for a tag, first off a trainer switch, Rudy actually has pretty good stats. The problem is there were some prices in that sample, and this horse, it feels like, is supposed to be the favorite here. So I would not hesitate to take a shot against him. And I think in a pick 5 kind of sequence, you want to zig where others are zagging. So you probably don't want to lean on this horse if a lot of money is going to be going through him. Craig, where else would you be looking to go here? Because I think one of the difficulties in this race is some of the other horses that you might want to consider are also speed types. And it feels like if Prisoner can still run, he could be outwinging on the front end, and that might compromise some other speedy horses in this race, but I still think there are some others to consider.
Yeah, one thing usually with horses like this is they will show that speed early, barring just something going totally wrong. So I do kind of agree with the pace projector. I think the pace is going to be quick in here. It's a 10-horse field, tends to lead to that. So, and it is at the difficult distance of 6.5 furlongs. My first inclination was Magnificent Chrome, just because he had run a nice speed figure of 96 last time. But I have to be honest, I got to go back and look at that race. But it's a race that has been very underwhelming on the run backs. I'm not sure I trust that 96 speed figure. So I went in a different direction and went to a horse that I think has some hidden form. And that's a 3-horse Bar 14. I saw a few things I like from him. Obviously, he dumped the rider last time out at the beginning. He kind of stumbled, lost the rider. So you can put a line through that. But the further down good races get in the past performances, the more hidden the form. The time before that, he took a big bump at the start of the race. And keep in mind, he was running at the higher class of 40,000. He's been running on turf a bit, but I do think he's a good horse on the dirt as well. And I just think with the form, the drop in class, that he's one that's going to be pretty dangerous given the pace.
Bar 14 is kind of an interesting horse to talk about because even though he dumped the rider last time, he actually went on and ran the entire race. And it's funny, if you go back and watch the replay of that race, the teletimer actually caught Bar 14 the entire way because, I mean, he ran in front of the field and was, I guess, setting the pace, even though the horses with riders were all trailing him. And he did stop the teletimer in 1:23 and 2, I believe. He won the race by like 15 lengths, obviously minus 120 pounds, for whatever that's worth. So, I mean, he clearly did have running on his mind last time. We'll see what he can do with the jockey here. I guess my problem with Bar 14 is, of all the other speeds in the race, it feels like he's not quite quick enough to keep up with a few others surrounding him, including Prisoner, if that one does have speed. So I kind of wonder what we'll get from him, what kind of trip he'll work out. He's never really shown the propensity to want to pass horses, and he might have to do that in this race. But I do think he's an interesting horse here that I wouldn't want to completely leave off my tickets. I do think that horse that you first mentioned, Craig, is kind of interesting. The number 1, Magnificent Chrome. I have the same concerns about the quality of the last race that you do, but the one thing I will say about that is the two horses that finished in that photo with him, Raven Rocks and Ernie Banker, were both closing from towards the back of the pack, and that's a race where the pace completely fell apart, and the only horse that was involved in the pace that stuck around until the finish was Magnificent Chrome. So in a lot of ways, I thought he ran the best race of anybody that day, and now he's coming back in a pretty similar spot, maybe even a slightly easier spot if we don't see the best of Prisoner here, if you just kind of take him out of consideration. And I know some people might be turned off by the fact that he's going out for Randy Persad. He's got the 10-pound bug rider Elsa Morrison riding, but I mean, if you look at the recent stats, Randy Persaud's runners, they've been showing up recently at Aqueduct and actually doing pretty well. Some of them at prices, and I don't have a big problem with the way Elsa Morrison rides. I think she does just fine and places horses well tactically, so I think Magnificent Chrome is definitely a contender in this race and should be a square price. The other horse that I find interesting is the number 10 Swinton, and he's another one that could be compromised by the presence of Prisoner in this race, depending on how fast that one is out of the gate, because Swinton has one way to go, and that is to the front end. I do think, though, that he is just getting some needed class relief after they got a little bit too ambitious with him off that maiden victory, running him in a pair of starter allowance races. He clearly wanted no part of a mile last time, so I think cutting back in distance is going to be the right move for him.
Yeah, that was the tough thing for me when I landed on Bar 14, is there's not really a closer if you think things are going to fall apart that you can latch onto in here. It's more a couple that are pressing type. So for me, really difficult race. If I do play a pick 5, I won't use Prisoner and use a couple of the ones we mentioned. Magnificent Chrome, Bar 14. Swinton was one of them. Maybe even a little bit of El Mayor just off the barn change. But yeah, it's a very tough race in my opinion.
Yeah, it's certainly a tricky one. And speaking of horses that could close, I mean, the ones that I saw were potentially the two inside runners, Magnificent Chrome and Forest Spirit. I know that they both have run forwardly placed recently, but they have in the past shown the propensity to close and pass horses, whereas a lot of others in this race have not done that. So I think that those two inside runners do have some more versatility than the others. So, but it's, Craig, it's just another race like the first one we talked about, the 5th, where you could make a case to spread a little bit. And I think that's going to be a theme as we move on to the later races in this weekend sequence. Let's proceed on to race 7. It's an allowance, non-winners of one other than going a mile on the main track around the one turn. And it's another pretty competitive field, Craig, though I do believe that the clear horse to beat is the number 4, Three Jokers, one that I just feel like is at the right level and competing at the right distance. They've tried a few different things with him. They've tried going longer, a mile and an eighth. I think the one-turn mile is really right up this horse's alley.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to come up with some logical alternatives to him, but at the end of the day, he's just a little bit faster than these on our TimeformUS speed figures, like consistently faster. He almost always runs 110 pluses, other than that race where he ran into American Revolution, but obviously I think you can just draw a line through that one. My one real concern with him is where he's shown on the pace projector, because he hasn't shown a big propensity to win from off the pace. But he did close ground nicely last time, so I would agree with you. He is the horse to beat. Outside of him, I mean, it's kind of hard for me to have a lot of confidence in some of these others. I wanted to latch on to Dust Devil, and he's one I would use if I do play a pick five or use in the bottom half of exactas, but he just doesn't seem to win very much. He won kind of early in his career, but hasn't done a lot of that lately, particularly at this higher class. He's had some nice trips, so this is another tough one for me. I should have mentioned the pace projector shows it as a fast-paced race. I do think you have to make a decision about the entry, particularly Castle Chaos, who I think is a contender in here. But unfortunately, you rarely get value on entries. He's in with an owner entry where Nice Guy Stables owns part of one and all of the other. But I think he's going to take some of the money as well. So any value you would have had on Castle Chaos is probably out the window, unless that one scratches.
Yeah, I do see this pace as heating up a little bit because you got those speed horses, No Burn, who does his best running on the front end, and the number 2 Chowda, who seems like he's got to get sent from the inside. And that horse that you mentioned, Castle Chaos, he wants to be forward as well, as does the 8 American Revolution, who's stretching out, or I should say American Gentleman, who's stretching out from sprints. So American Revolution, I think, would win this race. Yeah, it does feel like a pace that could heat up. So we'll see how they ride 3 Jokers. He does, he can pass horses, but like you said, he is one that wants to be forwardly placed. I did think that 3 Jokers ran a better race than Dust Devil when they met behind Core Conviction on December 12th. It seemed like Dust Devil had a lot of momentum built up coming to the 8th pole that day, but he just kind of did what Dust Devil tends to do when he hung in the late stages. His momentum kind of stalled coming past the 8th pole, and 3 Jokers actually was kicking away from Dust Devil at the end of that race, so it made me want to take 3 Jokers more than Dust Devil. He'll be a shorter price, but I just feel like he's a more likely win candidate. The horse that I'm most interested in, though, Craig, is the number 7 Southern District, kind of because of what that pace projector is indicating, and I think that could really work in the favor of this horse. They've run him on the turf in more than half of his starts, in 4 of his 7 career starts, and I can't figure out why. He's clearly a better dirt horse than turf horse. I mean, just looking at his speed figures, I believe that his 3 highest speed figures have all been earned on the dirt, not the turf, yet they kept going back to the turf with him. And I think his dirt races are actually pretty good. He ran well to break his maiden at Churchill last year, was against a very slow pace at Saratoga after that when he tried winners for the first time. And then last time out at Aqueduct, he's competed in his last 3 races with blinkers on, and they're taking the blinkers off this time. And I think it's because of the way that he traveled in his last race. That pace was fast, and it looked like he was a horse that would benefit from closing that day, but he just got a little too keen heading into the clubhouse start, and I think wound up racing closer to that quick pace than the connections probably anticipated, and he kind of petered out a little bit towards the end, didn't quite get the distance. With horses like this, I like them getting back to a 1-turn mile because you typically get pace in these races, and horses generally have an easier time closing from off the pace, so I think Southern District fits this race pretty well, and I think he's one of the runners in this field who still has some upside.
Yeah, I would agree. I prefer him much to Dust Devil. As you said, I just don't trust Dust Devil. If there's one that's going to be coming late, I think he's the obvious choice. You're right about the dirt speed figures. They all are higher than his turf. And one thing to note is 2 recent turf races, he just wasn't really competitive, and figures in those races, even though we use a different adjustment for lengths behind on turf, it's bigger. They still, to me, can get a little bit inflated at times. When you see his allowance race 2 turf races back, even though he was only beaten 3 1/4 lengths, he was 8th in a field of, I think it was just 10. So he was never a factor in that. So I agree with you. He's clearly better on dirt. I do like the 1-turn mile, and I think he is the logical alternative to 3 Jokers.
Yeah, before we move on, one horse that we haven't mentioned yet, or really talked about, is the number 5, No Burn, and he is a dangerous horse in this race. I'm concerned about the pace heating up too much for him, but I'm always scared of these William Morey horses. They've been running out of their skin basically wherever he's competing, at Turfway or at Aqueduct as well. He's had a very strong meet with limited starters. This horse has the speed figures to be competitive, and I think he's dangerous. I just worry about the trip he's going to pull here.
Yeah, that's the thing. He got kind of caught in a speed duel pole last time, really fast fractions. Kind of gave it up, but that was a mile and an eighth. Maybe the one turn be more to his liking, which he had run 2 back, where he got a 114 speed figure. But I didn't have him up top just because of the other speed. I think Chowda drawing inside, stretching back out to that full mile is definitely going to show some speed. Castle Chaos, as you mentioned, also stretching out is a speed horse. So that was my one concern with that one. But yeah, he's certainly dangerous, but he's not one that I'll be betting.
Let's move on to the feature on this card, the Grade 3 Withers, this one going a mile and an eighth for the 3-year-olds, offering 10 Kentucky Derby qualifying points to the winner of this race, and all of the points will be given out in this one with no Bob Baffert runners competing. Craig, I'm not sure that this race is necessarily going to produce the Kentucky Derby winner or many Kentucky Derby starters, but it's a pretty interesting race to handicap, we've got to say. You've got 11 runners signed on, many that you could make a case for. I think that the 2 horses that I pegged as favorites on the morning line, Constitution Lawyer and Early Voting, both coming off maiden victories, they do have upside, but I can't say that I view either one as having a major edge over this field.
No, I agree. I totally see why you tabbed Early Voting as the morning line favorite. I mean, he won his only start. It's Chad Brown. It's Jose Ortiz. But he's got some lengths to find to catch up to a few others in here for sure. And that's never something I really want to take a short price on. It wouldn't shock me if he won for sure. I expect him to improve. He ran a 97 first out. I'm sure he's going to run, if he runs his race, he's going to run anywhere from 10, even more points higher, but that still might not guarantee him a win in this field. There's some other good runners in here. The horse you mentioned, Constitution Lawyer, I'm a little curious about your take on him. The horse he beat last time went off. I think it was a 1-5 yesterday and got beat by a first-time starter. Don't get me wrong, he ran okay in that race, talking about a horse named Long Term, who was 11 lengths clear of the rest of the field when he ran second behind Constitution Lawyer. But I wonder how much he was carried by the track that day. It was one of those days I think was a speed and rail day at Aqueduct. He did run that nice 107 speed figure, but it was a wet track and he was just kind of pulling away. And I think long term it pays to be leery of speed figures on days like that. So the horse I'm most interested in is the horse who was able to win the Jerome, and that's Courvoisier, I believe is how you say it. I'll have to check with my buddy Larry on that one, the French expert. But I like what he's been doing. He's by Tapit. He's already won at this mile and an eighth distance. But what impresses me most is both of his last races, he's been able to sit up right on a fast pace, all the fractions in red, and just be able to gut it out and win in the end. So for me, above the 2 morning line favorites, I put Courvoisier as the horse to beat.
Yeah, I'm kind of on board with your take on all 3 of those horses. Early Voting, he looked good in his debut. I wouldn't say it was spectacular. The runner-up in there, Matt Doyle, he's a horse that doesn't really like to change leads, and he typically is a little bit of a hanger, so I think that allowed Early Voting to get to the wire first, even though he seemed to be shortening stride a little bit at the end. Early Voting's got this massive pedigree that says he's supposed to be a runner. He's by Gun Runner. The dam of Early Voting is a half-sister to both Spitestown, and I believe a full to IRAP, a good Doug O'Neill horse from a number of years ago who could go long on the dirt. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons that people might be interested in this horse along the Derby trail, but I agree with you, Craig. He's got to show more to really be considered the horse to beat in this race. So I wanted to look elsewhere. And with Constitution Lawyer, you made all the points that I really wanted to highlight with him. He was on an inside speed bias track last time out. I think that carried him a little bit. I think that helped him run that standout 107 TimeformUS speed figure. And I haven't seen your speed figures for Aqueduct from Thursday yet, Craig, but I did look up the buyer numbers, and long term, that horse that was second to Constitution Lawyer came back and regressed by 12 buyer points when he lost as the 1-5 favorite yesterday. So I feel like that's not a good sign and maybe calls into question the quality of that race the Constitution Lawyer won. I like that he's got all that experience at the distance, but like you said, so does Courvoisier, and Courvoisier has that tactical speed. He has handled those different types of pace situations, so I think you make a really solid case for him. And, Craig, this is a race where the pace projector is predicting a fast pace, and I understand why. There is an 11-horse field typically in these situations on the dirt with a lot of horses. We do put that fast pace flag in the PPs, but I don't see that many confirmed front-running types in here, so I do think Courvoisier is going to get the kind of trip that he's already shown he can handle.
Yeah, that was my exact thought. It might even be easier because when I see a horse like early voting, we're just basing that on one race where he basically went wire to wire with a little pressure early. He didn't go particularly fast doing that. And then the other horse up there with him is Grantham, who is stretching out, but he hasn't been on the lead in any of his races, and he actually won on synthetic last time. So it wouldn't even surprise me if Courvoisier was able to lead this race, something he hasn't been able to do. Not that he has to, he certainly doesn't, but if he gets an easy lead, I think he's going to be really dangerous in here. I am curious what you think of Grantham moving back to the dirt. He was one that piqued my interest a little bit, but as I look through who he's been beating, I was a little less enthusiastic.
Yeah, I'm interested in some prices in this race because I respect Courvoisier. I'm taking a slightly negative stance on the two horses that I pegged as the morning line favorites, and I do want to find some value. And one of the horses that I am interested in, Craig, is Grantham. I agree that he hasn't faced the toughest field, at least not last time at Turfway Park. I think that race over the Tapeta, it was a little bit underwhelming, both in terms of who he ran against and just visually, it was kind of workmanlike. But I will say that dirt race that he ran in first time out at Churchill Downs, I know that the winner, Rocket Dog, who looked so impressive, came back and disappointed in his next start, but that was a horse that kind of just was a bit of a head case next time out and just basically self-combusted. But the horses that finished behind Rocket Dog in that Churchill Downs race from November 19th, they've all come back and run pretty well, if not validating the speed figure. Some of them have run even faster in their subsequent starts. And I just think if you look down through the horses that were behind Rocket Dog and Grantham, that feels like it was a deceptively strong race. And I actually like that race even more than I do Grantham's synthetic race last time out. So I feel like this horse might have more ability than it seems at first glance. And he also gives me the impression that he is one of these horses that can run all day. He's got plenty of stamina breeding on the bottom side. He's got, like I said, that grinding style where it seems like he just keeps finding more, and he can be placed relatively close to the pace. So I think that's another reason that he could pull a good trip in here. So he is one of the ones that I wanted to use. I'm going a little bit wacky though with my top pick here, Craig. There are 5 horses coming out of the Jerome into this race, and I'm definitely interested in Courvoisier, the horse that you highlighted, who did win the Jerome. But the other horse that I want out of the Jerome, who I'm going to make my top pick, is the number 6, Unbridled Bomber. He had some things working in his favor in the Jerome, obviously the pace being one of them, because the pace was pretty quick and he was closing into it. But let's remember, we've been talking a lot about a lot of races or race days at Aqueduct around New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. That was a time at Aqueduct when speed was very dangerous on the main track. It seemed like speed favoring days, especially because it got closer to January 1st and January 2nd. And Unbridled Bomber was one of the few trying to close in the Jerome. Maybe that speed bias was somewhat mitigated by the fast pace. I think that's a fair argument. But Unbridled Bomber, he didn't get to kind of build up the momentum that you want to see in that race, because when he was making his move coming to the top of the stretch, he got pushed inside, and Dylan Davis chose the rail path, and he tried to go inside of the tiring frontrunner Hagler, and it just seemed like he chose the wrong path to try to go through, because Hagler, as he was tiring, drifted inside and forced Dylan Davis to kind of pull up on Unbridled Bomber, go around that horse, and have to alter course. And it seemed like when that happened, he lost the momentum that he had built up closing into the race, and I think that cost him a on-the-board finish, or potentially even a runner-up finish that day. So he did have some things going in his favor, but I also think the trip didn't quite work out last time. And he is a horse that I have this opinion about where I think he wants to run all day. So I'm kind of committed to sticking with him as he stretches out to the mile and an eighth here. And he just feels like the kind of horse that has to fly under the radar in this race, going out for a low profile barn like Jimmy Ryerson in a race where there are so many top connections and other horses that have to take money.
Yeah, he's one I'm definitely going to be using with Courvoisier. There's 2 horses I think that you have to look at if you think the race is going to fall apart, and it's the 4 Gilded Age and the 6 Unbridled Bomber. Gilded Age improved quite a bit when he added blinkers last time, seemed to show more interest, closed, drew away at the end to break his maiden at Churchill. But for all the reasons you said, I actually much prefer Unbridled Bomber. I don't like when closers get their run stopped like he did in the stretch and not or on the turn, and he kind of had to regather, and that usually costs more than what it seems on paper. You know, you might look at it and think it only cost a length, but having to regather for a horse like him that's trying to make one run can be pretty disastrous. So I would agree he is a horse to be interested in as a price, and I'll certainly be using him in the exactas. Any thoughts on Gilded Age? I thought he did run well last time, but I thought maybe that we saw what we're going to get from him, and it's probably a couple lengths too slow.
Yeah, I wonder if he's a horse that I missed a little bit on the morning line, because when I posted the line that I did for this race on, I think, Wednesday night, I had like 10 people reply to me that Gilded Age was their horse at this race, which I was not anticipating. Apparently, he's a buzz horse on the Derby Trail. I didn't get that memo. But yeah, I mean, he was visually impressive last time. And I will say, his first 3 races, he faced some strong fields. It's just, he was never really involved in any of them. It seems like he's been a green horse that benefited from the addition of blinkers. It's just, he has so little early speed. I mean, I think he must be last on the pace projector, if not close to it. I didn't look at that far. I mean, he's shown second to last on the pace projector, and no surprise. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong race now. I went one race ahead to race 9. He's last on the pace projector. No surprise there, because he just can't get out of the gate. He doesn't have much early speed. I guess he's a horse that could appreciate the mile and an eighth, but if he's going to be bet down from that 10-1, I wanted to go for some others. Let's close things out with the last race on this card, Craig, closing out the pick 5 sequence. It is race 9, a New York bred maiden special weight, going 7 furlongs. And there are a lot of favorites in this sequence and on this day that I'm trying to take a stand against. I'm not going to take a big stand against the favorite in this race, Golden Code, the number 10, the Todd Pletcher horse, who's making his second career start. He ran into a really good one in his debut in Bold Journey. That was a second-time starter for Bill Mott, who just basically, ran off the screen after a very good debut. I'm not sure where that horse has been since then, but he looked like an exciting 3-year-old prospect. And Golden Code, I thought he was game to finish second to that runner, and if he improves at all off that debut, he's going to be a handful.
Yeah, I'm certainly not dismissing Golden Code. He could easily win this race, and I got no problems with him at all. If I make it this far, in the pick 5, if I play, this isn't a race I'm really interested in playing vertically, because I think the favorites are the ones to beat. Golden Code for the reasons you mentioned. The other one I would use is Relate for Steve Asmussen. I think he was a bit against the track last time, so maybe he had a little more second out improvement that is a little bit hidden. But he's still going to have to beat Golden Code, and that's no easy one. The one horse I'm against in here that's probably going to take some money is Moped Dennis. He's a horse who basically ran on the good rail last time. He didn't run particularly fast doing so. Only got an 82 TimeformUS speed figure. But maybe if people are looking for a second-time starter, expecting some improvement, they might lean to him. But I wasn't a fan of his at all. So mostly for me, it would be the 2 favorites. If I was going to throw in one other horse, it would be Double Maker, who debuts for Rob Atras. He's a first-time starter, and I noticed yesterday that he won with this very kind of horse. As a matter of fact, he beat the horse we talked about long term at a big price. It was a New York bred maiden special weight for 3-year-olds. That one was at a mile. This one's at 7 furlongs. I haven't looked to see if those two had maybe been working together or anything like that, but just one of the short trend things I like to notice, that sometimes these things happen in pairs or even bunches. So if I was going to use a C-type horse, it would be Double Maker.
Yeah, you touched on all the horses that I wanted to mention, and I really have very similar takes on all of them, Craig. Golden Code, we covered him. Relate, I agree he was against the track last time. My one knock against Relate is that this horse cost almost $700,000. You would think this is the kind of one that they would want to win early with, or have him ready to go right off the bat when he costs that much money. And he's just been a little disappointing in both career starts, kind of considering the expectations around him. He was green last time as well. He didn't change leads until very late in the stretch, approaching the wire. I never like to see that when a horse is making a second start when he still hasn't quite figured things out, but maybe he'll do better this time. Moped Dennis, he was on the best part of the track last time. I totally agree. That was a race that also featured a fast pace, and he was closing into it. I really like the stride on this horse. He's got a big loping way of going. It seems like the type that's going to appreciate even more ground than the 7 furlongs he's getting here. I don't think Moped Dennis is untalented. I think he could pan out to be okay, but you kind of do have to take a negative stand on him just based on the fact that he was so helped by the track and circumstances first time out. That first-time starter that you mentioned, Double Maker, I am very interested in. I feel like people might overlook him a little bit because Rob Atras doesn't really ride Ruben Silveira, but do take note that Dylan Davis is not riding at Aqueduct on Saturday. He's down at Gulfstream, so I think there's one less top rider in the colony, and I think trainers like Rob Atras might have to turn to somebody they don't often use because of that, especially in a large field like this. And Double Maker, Craig, you were onto something there. He actually did work with Eagle in Love on December 31st, that fast gate workout for both of them. The time matches for each of these horses, and Eagle in Love is that first-time starter that won for Rob Atras on Thursday. Got a 76 buyer for that performance, so that horse is actually pretty good. And Double Maker by Empire Maker, I was a big fan of the dam of this horse, Mischief Maker. She was a nice New York bred who competed going long in stakes races. She's been a good producer. She's had a couple of foals that are good, making out, making sense. So I feel like Double Maker could be one that might fly under the radar. And Rob Atras has actually done pretty well in the past year with first-time starters, so he's a horse that I definitely want to use. But like I said, when we first started with this race, I'm not way against Golden Code. If I was going to make an ABC type of ticket, he might be my only A. Perhaps I'd upgrade Double Maker to an A because I do think he's a horse that could be a price in this race that's interesting, but the others would be a cut below for me.
Yeah, it was hard for me to get past those ones we talked about in this race. So it's one, if I could come up with a pick 5 ticket, we'll have to see after scratches. I would definitely be pretty skinny in this race.
Yeah, and I did start to put together a little bit of a ticket maker experiment here to see how it would stack up, and it's adding up to quite a lot, Craig, unsurprisingly, because we talked about spreading in a lot of these races, and unfortunately you can't spread in them all, but I will say that I feel like the sixth race is one where I really would have to have quite a bit of coverage. Trying to beat Prisoner, I would leave him off my tickets, but I do think that there are quite a few horses that you could make a case for using as alternatives. For me, the most likely ones would be Magnificent, Chrome, Forest Spirit, and Swinton, and even Bar 14, the horse that Craig mentioned. The seventh race, I would lean mostly on 3 Jokers in Southern District. In the Withers, I like Grantham and Unbridled Bomber as my 2 price horses. I'm going to go slightly against both favorites, Constitution Lawyer and Early Voting. I like Constitution Lawyer a bit more than Early Voting, but I would also prominently use Courvoisier, the horse that Craig likes. He'd be like a B for me on an ABC type ticket. And then in the last race, I would lean on Golden Code, use Double Maker prominently, and then have a few backups. I skipped over the 5th race. We spent a lot of time on that one at the start of the podcast, but that's another one where I would use Runabout prominently, but like to have a lot of coverage outside of him, including with that long shot that I mentioned, O'Shea Can You See?
Yeah, I would use O'Shea Can You See? I would lean more heavily on Potantico in that one and use Runabout some. The 6, I agree. I'm going to be spreading. Would use Bar 14 as an A, but definitely use some others. And I agree, I would not use Prisoner. And then I would get more skinny in the later legs. 3 Jokers and Southern District would probably be about it. If I was going to use a C, maybe No Burn, just thinking maybe he could run loose at this 1-turn mile. But he would be more of a C type, as I said. The Withers, I would go pretty skinny with Courvoisier being the A for sure. I'm not going to use the 2 morning line favorites. And then maybe use a little bit of Grantham and Unbridled Bomber. I'm not using Gilded Age. Like you, I didn't get the memo. Maybe it has to do with Bill Mott. But yeah, that's not a horse I'm interested in, especially when you tell me everybody seems to like him. So you're probably not going to get that 10-1. And then the last race, as we said, I'm going to lean on Golden Circle. Use Rebate more as a B type, and the first time starter Double Maker down as like a C type.
Well, that's a look at Aqueduct's Saturday Pick 5 sequence. Hopefully we gave out some good opinions. It's a really tough sequence to put a ticket together, but it seems like one that could pay well because there are some vulnerable favorites that you could try beating along the way. Craig, we'll be back next Tuesday to do the TimeformUS Pacecast, and we should have a lot to talk about because even outside of Aqueduct, there are Derby preps taking place elsewhere. The Holy Bull at Gulfstream, the Robert B. Lewis at Santa Anita on Sunday. So it seems like we're going to get a bit of a clearer sense of the Kentucky Derby picture after this week. It's still early in the season, but it's always fun to take in these 3-year-old prep races.
Oh, for sure. And I think after this week, we start moving into the bigger points races. We're still at the point now where they don't really make a lot of difference when we get into March and April. But, These I consider these, even though they're called Derby preps, like the Withers, it's not a Derby prep. It's a prep for the Gotham, and then the Gotham's a prep for the Wood. You just kind of got to go one step at a time. A lot of these horses we're not going to see in these races going forward, but a few we will, and it's always fun for me to watch them develop and the good ones move on.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast coming up on Tuesday.